Hello and most welcome to 1251. There's a rather clement November's morning. I'm a bit tired. Here we have the book from the University of Lund, never been read for 8 years. It's a privilege to open the book for the first time. And I will continue to read it. I hope that I will further the understanding for this incredibly important issue, I would say. So, 1251. And we are in chapter 2, and it's page 94. The picture of history of the universe that became predominant in cosmology of the 20th century, expressed in the now standard cosmological model, should have been enough to make questionable the time-denying tradition against which we rebel. According to this picture, the universe has a beginning and a history. The standard cosmological model offered powerful reasons to believe that the present universe began in violent events. Whether the values of these events are represented as finite or infinite, in a moment close in time to these occurrences, the application of the laws of nature as we now understand them seems to fail, and the elementary constituents of nature, as they are described by the standard model of particle physics and at another level by chemistry, could not have existed or must have been very different. All the subsequent events that take place in the universe form part of a history that must include the evolution of those regularities and of that structure. The blinkers imposed by the extra-scientific tradition that I have identified as the chief target of our argument diminish or deface the significance of these cosmological discoveries for all of physics and and indeed for all of natural science. The denial or diminishment of the reality of time and the related view of mathematics as a shortcut to the understanding of ultimate reality have survived in the face of the discovery of the historical character of the universe through a series of conceptual maneuvers. The combined and cumulative effect of these maneuvers is to disguise the contradiction between that tradition and what we have already found out about the universe and its history. One such maneuver is the application of the Newtonian paradigm, that is, of initial conditions and law-governed phenomena within a configuration space bounded by those conditions to the whole of the universe, where it cannot work, rather than to a part of the universe where it can. A second maneuver is the acceptance of the features of the present differentiated universe as if they were traits that nature possesses at all times in its history. A third maneuver is the reification of an idea of scientific practice and of causal explanation that is wedded to the notion of an immutable framework of natural laws, deterministic or statistical. As well as to the idea of a permanent stock of ultimate components of nature, as if we could not continue to do science or explain natural events without embracing these assumptions. A fourth maneuver is the marginalization of cosmology. The premise of this marginalization is that we can understand the workings of nature through the study of its basic constituents without regard to their origin or future, which is to say, without regard to time and history. All these maneuvers deployed to reconcile the new and now not so new cosmology with the tradition that we oppose rely on the very line of ideas that they are designed to protect. As a result, all of them are tainted to greater or lesser extent by circularity. We propose to cast the philosophical prejudices enshrined in that tradition aside and to consider, free from their restraints, the implications for physics as well as for science more generally of our present view of the universe. We ask the reader to suspend disbelief and to consider what the cosmological discoveries of the last 100 years might be taken to mean once we relinquish the impulse to reconcile them with the tenets paper getting stuck here in the end. Reconcile them with the tenets of the time-denying and mathematics worshipping tradition that we dispute. the substance of this part of our argument is contained in the second and the third of the three main theses of this book, that time is real and inclusive all the way down. That is, everything changes, including the laws of nature. And that mathematics is useful to understanding the world precisely because it abstracts from certain features of the world, namely time and phenomenal distinction. Not because it affords us privileged insight into timeless truth, to carry forward this intellectual program. It is not enough to rebel against the tradition we have described as our chief enemy. It is also necessary to contend with the second, lesser adversary, represented by more recent developments in physics. According to this secondary target of our argument, the theme that should command the agenda of physics is the final unification of our theories of the forces of nature, and in particular the unification of gravity with the electromagnetic, the strong and the weak forces, as represented in the so-called standard model of particle physics. Physics, in what I earlier called its main line, in contrast to its sideline, has been engaged, at least since the mid-19th century, in an effort to bring all the known and basic forces of nature under the aegis of a single cohesive set of laws. only one final, definitive battle supposedly remains to fight and win. The struggle to unify our ideas about gravity with our understanding of the other natural forces. The history of the universe as presented by contemporary cosmology is, by the lights of this intellectual project, no more than an interesting sidelight on the ultimate topic. The ultimate topic is the structure of the natural world and the content of the laws that explain it. According to this view, the structure can be explained. Indeed, according to this view, it must be explained. Without reference to the history. The structural explanation is much more likely to help explain the history of the universe than the history of the universe is to explain the present structure. History would lead us toward narrative and away from theory. Here again, we see the power of the time-denying and mathematics idolizing tradition. All efforts to achieve this unification on the basis of such an approach to the relation between theory and history have thus far failed. They have failed in a particular way. The unhistorical theories that would advance the unification project and explain the workings of nature in its ultimate constituents, in particular contemporary string theory in particle physics. All turn out to be compatible with a vast number of other ways in which nature might also work, but does not in fact work. so far as we can observe. Moreover, within the observed universe, there are a number of constants or parameters that have mysteriously precise but as yet unexplained values. Some of these constants we may treat as dimensional. That is to say, as measures, like rulers of the rest of nature. Then, however, the seeming arbitrariness of the remaining dimensionless parameters stares us all the more starkly in the face. There is, however, this secondary opponent of ours assures us. A solution to all our problems, or at least a direction in which to look for a solution. The solution is to treat our universe as simply one of many universes. In the strongest formulation of this idea, the one that has exercised the greatest influence on contemporary cosmology, these are not just many possible worlds. They are many actual worlds. The universe that we perceive, observe, and the many universes that we could not even in principle observe. The laws formulated or discovered in the course of the unification project address the full array of hypothetical universes. what seems to be a failure the failure to explain what we observe in terms that do not also explain what we do not observe. As in fact they insist an achievement the unified or grand laws account for the totality of universes. Not just for the universe that we happen to inhabit. The enigmatic constants or parameters with their disturbingly precise and unexplained values will eventually be accounted for by lower order deterministics or statistical explanations addressing our segment of the vastly larger multiverse. We shall be guided toward we shall be guided to all these lower order explanations by a reverse epistemological engineering. The selection of that subset of the larger set of laws that will be capable of producing and of accommodating our existence. The so-called anthropic principle in one of its stronger or weaker versions. Against the descent of science into allegory, circularity, and special pleading and factless speculation, we affirm the first of our three central theses, that there is only one real universe. 2, all of the parts of which are or looser causal communion with one another. There is better reason to believe today in the succession of causally connected universe than there is to believe in the plurality of causally unconnected universes. The lesser enemy against which we direct our argument, the attempt to promote the unification of physics by multiplying imaginary universes, has as its ulterior motive the concealment of the vulnerabilities of our chief enemy. The traditional thought that throughout the history of modern physics has denied or devalued the reality of time. The most important service or disservice rendered by the secondary opponent has been the postponement of a reckoning with the main antagonist. The lesser enemy has taken care not to bring into question the traditional thought that has entangled modern physics from Galileo and Newton to Einstein and quantum mechanics. In the diminishment of time and in the treatment of mathematics as a royal road to timeless truth. So mathematics makes the goal timeless truth, and by time I would say that has become the goal for everything. So it's a moment 22 here, which is incredibly interesting. And it's mathematics itself that also is the judge whether this is a good method or not. As you can hear here now, sorry for the comment. It has therefore failed as well to expose the limits that this tradition places on our ability to grasp the full range of implications of the empirical discoveries of science. Instead, it has built a wall of defense around these equivocations. A working assumption of the argument of this book is that the two intellectual campaigns, the one against the denial of time and the worship of mathematics, the other against the plurality of universes, are connected. Given the history of these ideas, the thirst campaign is the decisive one. The second campaign is important but accessory. At issue is how we should best approach the future agenda of physics and cosmology. The association of string theory with the idea of a plurality of universes, a multiverse, threatens to deepen the tradition of thought that has refused fully to recognize the reality of time, and that has insisted on seeing mathematics as a shortcut to privileged insight into the ultimate nature of reality. Instead of deepening this tradition, we seek to rid ourselves of it. Cast this way of thinking aside, the better to reinterpret past discoveries and make future ones without the restraints that it imposes. 3. The singular existence of the universe. The conception of the singular existence of the universe introduced. There is one real universe. This universe may extend indefinitely back in time in a succession of earlier universes or of earlier states of the universe. We have no sufficient reason to believe in the simultaneous existence of other universes. With which we do not and cannot have now or forever causal contact. Causal communion is the decisive criterion for the joint membership of natural phenomena in the same universe. The parts of a universe are causally connected, directly or indirectly, to all the other parts over time. Over time is the first and most important qualification. Two parts of nature belong to the same universe if they share any event in their causal past, even if they have subsequently become causally disjoint. It is the network of causal relations viewed backward into the past that determines the scope of causal communion and thus the separate existence of our universe. The criterion is dynamic rather than static, historical rather than exclusively structural, and proposes the reality of time. It is then not the constancy of the laws and symmetries of nature that distinguishes a universe. It is the causal connection over time. Causal connections, as the discussion of the second cosmological fallacy suggested, may not present themselves in certain states of nature as regularities. The laws, symmetries, and constants that we observe in the cool-down universe with its differentiated structure and its recurrent phenomena. The law-like workings of nature are best understood as a mode of causality rather than as the basis of causation. What matters to the discrimination of a single universe is that the constituents of such a universe display an uninterrupted causal history, whether or not in law-like and symmetrical fashion. Constituents of such a universe display an uninterrupted causal history, whether or not in law-like and symmetrical fashion. From the fundamental qualification relating the unity and identity of the one real universe to causal connection over time, there follows another qualification. Regions of the observable universe may not now be in causal contact, and what we can observe may form only a small part of a much larger universe. Nevertheless, causally disjoint parts of the universe continue to count as parts of the same universe, the one real one, if they share a common history. There is no clear distinction between the idea of causally disjoint parts of the one real universe and the notion of branching, bubbling, or domain universes that may arise in the course of the history of the universe. I shall later argue that such universes, if they exist, form part of a history of succession. The conception of branching universes describes incidents in history of succession or transformation. A view of such a history is in turn only a variant on the idea of the singular existence of the universe, formed in the course of events, stretching back indefinitely in time. Everything in the one real universe we claim in this book, including both the fundamental structures and the most general regularities of nature, changes sooner or later, although both the regularities and the structures are remarkably stable in the cool-down universe that we observe. That everything in the universe changes sooner or later cannot be inferred from the idea of the singular existence of the universe. The development and defense of this thesis is the concern of chapters 4 and 5 of this book. Nevertheless, an understanding of what the singular existence of the universe implies must anticipate some elements of the later argument about the mutability of both structures and the laws of nature. No part of the identity of a universe requires that it conserves the same laws and structures. Only that causation, albeit stressed, never be interrupted. Both the continuity of causation and the susceptibility of everything to change, including change itself, represent expressions of the inclusive reality of time. The proposal of the singular existence of the universe leads immediately to what I shall call the antinomy of cosmogenesis. The history of the universe under the thesis of a singular existence may extend indefinitely back into the past. It seems at first that of two things, one must be true. At some moment in this past, the universe, and with it, time, may have emerged out of nothing. However, as King Lear said to Cordelia, nothing will come of nothing. An unstable vacuum state, for example, is not nothing. It is something. It must have a history. Alternatively, the universe may be eternal. Eternity is infinity in time. Nothing, however, in nature can be infinite, and time is part of nature. According to the argument of this book, the most fundamental part, but part nonetheless. The infinite is a mathematical contrivance. Only a way of thinking that sees mathematics as the oracle of nature. And the prophet of science can make room for the infinite in its explanatory practices. One of the aims of this book is to combat that way of thinking and to offer an alternative to it. There is an infinite difference between an indefinitely long history and eternity. The invocation of an eternal universe is no more defensible than the appeal to an infinite initial singularity at the beginning of our present universe. In both instances, a mathematical idea with no counterpart in physical nature is made to do service for missing insight. We have reason to resist both sides of the antinomy of cosmogenesis. Neither science nor natural philosophy has any prospect of dissolving this antinomy. By justifying one of its sides, or by finding a third synthetic solution, rather than pretending that we can find our way out of this antinomy by a conceptual maneuver or by the subordination of natural science to some species of metaphysical rationalism. We should recognize this antinomy for what it is, a sign not only of the limits to the powers of science and of its ally in the natural philosophy, but also of our groundlessness. Our inability to grasp the ground of being or of existence. Science and the natural philosophy along with it can only be corrupted by claiming to have unlocked the secrets of being, of existence, and by seeking to occupy the place of a lost religion. It does not follow from our inability to resolve the antinomy of cosmogenesis that the idea of a history of the one real universe extending indefinitely back into the past to earlier universes or earlier periods of the universe in which we find ourselves is either incoherent or vulnerable to the objections aroused by the two sides of the antinomy. Something useful is gained by placing the confrontation with this antinomy in a remote and inaccessible past. Far beyond what, by the lights of the now standard cosmological model, is represented to be the incandescent and explosive beginning of our present universe, the work of empirical inquiry and causal investigation can then retreat step by step to that horizon of past time within the limits of our equipment and of our ingenuity. None of that work need make assumptions offensive to causal reasoning or to our natural experience, as either the making of something out of nothing or the eternity, that is to say, the temporal infinity of the world would. Under this self-denying and skeptical response, the antinomy of cosmogenesis continues to hang over us as a reminder of our radical and insuperable limitations of insight. It need not, however, prevent us from going forward without mistaking science for the source of a solution to the enigma of existence. Quite right, the good old Roberto Unger. This antinomy of cosmogenesis recalls Kant's first antinomy of pure reason in his critique of pure reason. In his formulation, the unacceptable thesis following immediately upon his introductory discussion of the system of cosmological ideas is that the world has a beginning in time, and in space it is also enclosed in its boundaries. The unacceptable antithesis is that the world has no beginning and no bounds in space, but is infinite with regard to both time and space. In accordance with the spirit of his system, Kant presents both time and space, as he does causation, as presuppositions of the way in which we represent phenomena. By contrast, we regard time and space, like causation, as features of nature, and believe that the power of science is to correct our pre-scientific understanding of the world, is open-ended, although it is not unlimited. Moreover, Kant supposes time and space to share a common fate. They must both and together be either bounded or infinite. He then argues that neither possibility is acceptable to reason. In contemporary cosmology, the insistence on treating space and time as one, with regard to their boundedness or infinity, is preserved only in the conception of Riemannian space-time, assumed by the predominant interpretations of general relativity. And of its field equations to be an integral part of this theory and a beneficiary of its empirical validations. In rejecting that conception, both as an account of nature and as an indispensable aspect of the general relativity, we open the way to the distinct and unequal treatment of time and space. Space may be emergent, indeed repeatedly emergent in successive universes or periods in the history of the one real universe. according to accepted topological principles, the universe may be finite in spatial extent and yet have no boundaries. Time, however, we argue, is best regarded as non-emergent in the sense that it derives from nothing else, and thus as the susceptibility of what it is to change. What is to change represents the most fundamental aspect of natural reality. We may be tempted to conclude that time can be non-emergent only if it is eternal, thus admitting the infinite into our account of nature. However, all that the non-emergence of time may require is that time have continued indefinitely back into the past, that the world is temporal and justifies a temporal naturalism in our understanding of it, is an aspect of its being factitiously what it is, rather than something else. As with every other aspect of natural reality, the inclusive and non-derivative reality of time cannot be inferred from any higher order rational necessity. To resolve the antinomy of cosmogenesis exceeds the capabilities of science. We cannot look into the beginning and the end of time if it has a beginning and an end. We cannot explain temporal reality or the reality of time as emergent out of timeless being or out of nothingness. We cannot justifiably circumscribe the reach of time so that some parts of nature, its basic structures and the regularities that they exhibit remain immutably outside it. We cannot infer the temporal character of nature from supposed constraints on what can or must be. In obedience to the deliverances of metaphysics or of mathematics. All that we can do is to recognize the real as temporal, according to the lyrics of the country music song. It is what it is till it ain't anymore. Yet the recession of the history of the universe to a remote past gives a cosmology that refuses to inherit the pretenses of metaphysics and that recognizes its inability to settle the antinomy of cosmogenesis, a vast field in which to work. In the remainder of this section, I define concepts useful to making sense of the debate about one or many universes. The next section outlines the arguments for embracing the thesis of singular existence to the detriment of its rivals. The rest of the chapter develops the thesis by exploring its implications for the agenda of cosmology. At the time of this writing, the most influential version of the idea of many universes was the conception labeled the multiverse. Of a multitude of distinct universes, neither now nor ever in causal contact with one another, and each possessed of distinct structures and regularities. The most promising version of the idea of singular existence was the idea of a universe, the history of which extends backward before the formation of the present cool down universe to earlier universes or to earlier periods in the history of our universe, with the qualifications that I earlier enumerated. There is, according to the idea of singular existence, only one universe at a time. The contest between the conjecture of divergent universes, distinctively ruled and organized, and the conjecture of one real universe going back in time is the present shape of the argument. According to the idea of a plurality of universes, there are many, even indefinitely many, universes coexisting at the same time, or at least that is given the difficulty of ascertaining the temporal relation to one another, if indeed time has any reality, existing in such a way that they cannot be said to have a history. For the reason stated earlier, branching, bubbling, or domain universes emerging out of a common history do not, for the purpose of this terminology, represent plural universes. Plural universes, in the strong sense in which I use the term, share no common history. It's getting exciting as I need to put in a little pause. It's inside the tea. Such universes have no causal communion with one another and have never enjoyed such a contact, we are barred in principle and forever from access to them. A qualification to this property of plural universes is the conjecture of collisions among them. These collisions might leave traces of their occurrence, ripples in the cosmic microwave radiation background. Such ripples, however, have never been observed, and if observed, might have many other causes. Another qualification which certain adepts of the multi-universe idea have proposed is that these inaccessible universes may leave in our universe traces of their existence unrelated to collisions. For example, in the early 21st century, some cosmologists claimed to find evidence of a dark flow in the motion of galactic clusters. In such flow, they discerned a mark of the presence of other universes. Even if confirmed, however, such a phenomenon need not be a signature of another universe. It can be explained in other ways. As there is no prospect, even in principle, of accessing these other universes, regardless of the development of our observational and experimental equipment and capabilities. We cannot hope to demonstrate a mechanism of causal interaction between the other universes and our own. There are two main variants of plurality in this strong sense. Parallel universes are universes sharing the same fundamental structures and regularities as our universe, but not sharing causal contact or history. Divergent universes are universes likewise having no such shared causal contact or history, but, unlike parallel universes, possessing distinct regularities and structures. In contemporary discussion, the idea of divergent universes commonly goes under the label multiverse, although the label has sometimes also been used to express the idea of parallel universes with much resulting confusion. This simple classification of plurality into parallelism and divergence leaves open conceptually two intermediate possibilities. Universes that have the same basic structures without the same regularities, and universes that have the same regularities but without the same structure. However, the former possibility is absurd. The same structures would exhibit the same regularities. The latter possibility makes sense only if we suppose that the regularities underdetermine the states of affairs, countenancing a range of possible states of affairs. Manifest in different universes. Such was the reasoning that in the mid-20th century led a few opponents of the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics to an early version of the multiverse idea, and that in the late 20th century prompted many more adepts of the string theory school of particle physics to find in the multiverse view a justification for the latitudinarianism of their doctrines, better than to disregard the two intermediate possibilities. Both the ideas of parallel and of divergent universes have long genealogies in the histories of science and of natural philosophy. I shall disregard this history except insofar as its more recent incidents bear on the issue at stake in my argument. The notion of parallel universes with no causal contact or shared history, but with the same fundamental structures and regularities, universes that are therefore mirrors of each other's, performs no explanatory role in contemporary cosmology. If the structures and the regularities are the same and are not credited with any potential for transformative divergence over time, the existence of such postulated mirror universes does not work other than to express the fecundity of repeated cosmogenesis. It would be, however, unlike any similar fecundity in the evolution of life forms. In the evolution of life, even before the development of sexual selection and the corresponding Mendelian mechanism, multiplication prefigures variation. I think it's better to round up there. It was tough enough. Still coming to grips with this sharp, elusive in a way, like the Scarlet Pimpernel. It is like the argument is cutting a piece of paper. This is an A4 paper. He wants to go in and part it in two. It is in a way very thin argument, but I claim it is the biggest argument of all. Its vastness is hidden in the fact of its initial sense of thinness. The reason for that, I think, is with the Western concept of ontic take. We are cutting with big axes and we make bold statements that feels very solid, very important, but Roberto Mangabeira is firstly dissolving that solidity, that heaviness. The idea of making philosophy/science with cutting with axes becomes more and more brute, grotesque, too tough, too brutish, coarse, not so eloquent, smart. And I'm certain that this underlying crudity of the ontic mode, which is a different mode of existence, it's not a wrong mode, but it is in some aspect definitely a lower mode of being. Less perception, and you have these sharp divisions, and almost like a headache. I think of a headache when I think of classical physics. Bad posture, headache, tensions. And there is some importance that I present the ideas here of Roberto Mangabeira with some stability and balance, more than I usually have, because I think in this there is a seed to unity and wholeness of being. I say thank you very much. Have a very pleasant morning. We end with this beautiful view.